Welcome to the Golf Improvement Podcast, episode 33.
Welcome to the podcast for golf lovers and enthusiasts who are looking to take their games to new heights. Dedicated to custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice to improve your golf game. This is the Golf Improvement Podcast with your host, Tony Wright.
Hello, this is Tony Wright from Game Improvement Golf in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, with the Golf Improvement Podcast, dedicated to bringing you useful information on custom club fitting, short game improvement, and effective practice techniques to take your game to new heights. Well, you will really enjoy this interview with Dr. Christian Marquardt, the developer of the Science and Motion SAM Putt Lab. And it was a lot of fun to listen to this, but something happened at the end of this that is a little unusual, at least in terms of the podcast that I've done in the past. I always like to talk to whoever I interview right after the podcast and, say thank you and have a little bit of a discussion. But I wish I had recorded the discussion I had with Christian after the podcast this time. He talked about a number of things, but one of the things that really struck me, and I wanted to make sure I put into the podcast itself today, was he talked about helping people change their habits. And one of the things he said is to help someone change a habit that they have, something like parts of your golf swing, you need to make friends with your habits. And I thought, wow, I never thought of that. So to be able to make a change, you need to also kind of be a little comfortable with the things that you're doing and don't fight the things so much. Does that make sense? I think it does. And so I just thought that was a real nugget that I almost wish I had recorded so that I could keep it for later, maybe even put it into a little extra piece of the podcast. So from now on, after I finish one of these, I'm going to keep the recorder running just in case there's something else that I miss that we actually didn't talk about during the podcast that I want to pass on to you later. So without further ado, here's the interview with Dr. Christian Marquardt talking about putting movement dynamics. Hello, this is Tony Wright with the Golf Improvement Podcast, and today I'm very excited to get to speak with Dr. Christian Marquardt, who's one of the world's leading putting improvement experts. Christian Marquardt's a neuroscientist. He specializes in the fields of medicine, sports, and motor behavior research, and I would say motor learning too. In 2001, he got involved in golf and developed a system that is used worldwide for effectively analyzing and helping golfers improve their putting strokes, the Science and Motion Putt Lab. In 2003, he founded Science and Motion Sports in Germany and markets both SAM Putt Lab and he is involved with the SAM Academy. He has worked with members of the European Tour to help them improve their putting. He has developed some great approaches and treatments for the putting yips, and he also presently works as a putting coach for what he calls the PGA Tour PGA golf team in Germany, and he's the national putting coach for the German amateur golf team. So, Christian, I'm really delighted we'll get to talk about a very interesting putting topic today. Thank you.
Yeah, Tony, thank you for giving me the chance to talk to you.
Well, very good. Well, I always like to get people to sort of talk about how they kind of got where they are a little bit. So if you would talk in the beginning here about, how you first got interested in putting and then how you worked to create the SAM Putt Lab tool for use in analyzing and helping golfers improve their putting.
Yeah, so this is kind of a long story. I was educated more in informational processing, actually, but I started working in medicine. In a rehabilitation clinic, and we had an interdisciplinary team, and our task was to better understand movement control, movement learning, and then how we could best treat movement problems. Normally, our patients were coming because of brain damage. And at this time, we developed a couple of measuring systems for measuring movement. And actually, we were also discussing a couple of the concepts of neuroscience, where we deal with movement control. And it started mostly in the field of handwriting, which is a very interesting field because handwriting is already a very complex skill. You need to learn it. And it is a kind of a microcosmos where you can very easily evaluate all the mechanisms behind movement optimization. And we also had 3D ultrasound measuring systems. And then one day, a professor of mine, where I actually did my doctorate, said, hey, aren't you able to measure putting? Because we are doing a study on a ginkgo drug. Huh. In golfers suffering from the yips. And I said, well, sure, we have different opportunities. We measured the putting strokes of these golfers. And then we had a lot of very interesting results. Actually, there was no literature explaining what we have measured. And so I got into contact to several other golf pros around Munich, and we had the feeling, well, this is interesting, and we got to the TCC, which is teaching conference in Munich in 2003.
Yeah.
So at this point, we met Hank Haney and Dave Pelz coming to our booth, and so we discussed a lot about this data, and even Dave Pelz was not really able to explain what our data meant. So at this point, we were measuring far more than any other system before in putting. And Hank and Dave invited us to the US, and next week we booked a flight, and basically Dave Pelz was a little bit, kind of in competition with us. So, because he was already working in the field of putting, but Hank Haney was extremely interested in working with us, and he got our first customer buying 3 systems straight away. And actually, this was also the time where I started with Hank Haney on his chipping yips, yes. Which was a start of kind of a friendship where we were intensively discussing concepts, and I was, from this point on, traveling a lot into the US. And so this was basically the start of Sam Putt Lab. And from this point on, we started then founding our company and creating a tool which is more special to putting.
Amazing, and you know it's had it continues to be the tool for putting analysis. So you know it's had longevity of what were you talking now over a dozen years. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, basically, I think there is one interesting aspect in Sam Putt Lab. It is not only creating a lot of useful data. The concept behind Sam Putt Lab is based on our work, which we have done in our scientific environment. So we add a lot of knowledge from motor control, from motor behavior, and the way we present data and the way we then educate our coaches is very much linked to these concepts. So it is not only the data, it is even more important what you do with the data. Yeah,
and how you help people train to improve.
Yes.
Well, one of the concepts that, and I've taken some of your training, some of the certification training, and you talk about 6 elements, 6 fundamentals of putting. And one of the very interesting ones that has become more important as I've gotten into this is what you call movement dynamics. And that's what we're going to concentrate on in this podcast today. Can you talk a little bit about what movement dynamics is in the putting stroke, and why it's important to golfers if they want to have an excellent putting stroke?
Yeah, movement dynamics is the aspect of the movement which you don't really see with the naked eye. Basically, we see the stroke, but the details of how you execute the stroke, which is velocity and acceleration normally of, let's say, the putter head, cannot really be followed with a naked eye because the eye is too slow. So it would be very difficult, and you might film it and then look at it in slow motion. Still, you don't really see the details as compared to the curves, which we can calculate. So we calculate clubhead speed and clubhead acceleration, and actually what you can see in looking at velocity and acceleration is that you can watch the muscles at work. There is a direct correlation between these dynamic parameters and muscle activity. And normally in a biomechanical framework, you would see that velocity is the tonus of the muscle and acceleration is linked to the activation of a muscle. Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the characteristics of velocity and acceleration, you can see different performance levels, for example, or different ways of moving. And even more important, once we have learned a movement properly, so this is what we say is a skill. So if you have learned a movement, that it becomes a skill, then you can classify it by certain aspects of the vessel velocity profile and of the shape of the profile, the balance between acceleration phase and deceleration phase, and so on and so on. Even more, if it is automated, you can then look at repeatability, which is what we say consistency.
Yes.
So there are a lot of different aspects you could look at. So actually what you see is that a well-learned movement looking at velocity and acceleration behaves very much like a pendulum. It is very smooth and very consistent, and it's very energy efficient. So you can in simple words say that all the good putting strokes are kind of pendulum-like movements. They are very regular, very smooth. So the muscles do only what they need to do. There is not more acceleration or deceleration involved. It's a very smooth movement. And this is true for all skilled movements such as grasping or writing or walking. You have even more aspects which you can then see, like the isochronic principle, which is also true for all human movements. This is the principle of keeping the timing in movements constant and then changing the amplitude if the movement needs to be bigger. This is true, for example, in handwriting. This is also true in putting. So if you, for example, hit a longer putt, then you keep the timing constant, but you then have a longer backstroke, and so on. So there are a lot of different aspects we can look at. And in the hierarchy, if we look at the fundamentals, movement dynamics, because it's how you execute the stroke, is ranked very high. So if there's a problem with your movement dynamics, so if the muscles do not work properly, then certainly you will have a lot of distortion in other aspects of your putting stroke.
And a lot of inconsistency and things like that too, I guess, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, one of the things, and we haven't talked a lot about the details of SAM, but one of the unique aspects is in fact that you have quantified, strokes of over 100 European Tour pros, and so you see consistent aspects of the characteristics of the putting stroke. Any other things about movement dynamics, that you haven't talked about already a bit that you see in some of these, the best putting strokes, and what makes an excellent putting stroke from the standpoint of movement dynamics?
Yes. Well, our idea was in the beginning very simple. We thought about measuring, let's say, 100 PGA elite players from the tours, and then we find out which is the best way of hitting a putt. Then it turned out that there are some common aspects, but also some differences between the players. So we divided it into different categories. Due to movement dynamics, we look at tempo, at rhythm, and at timing. So these are different aspects of your dynamics, which mean that tempo is the overall tempo, or you might say the time you need to hit a putt. Yes. And then there are players with a slower tempo, like Lauren Roberts, swinging it very softly, very slow. Then intermediate tempos like, let's say, Brett Faxon, or faster tempos like Paul Azinger. What is interesting is that we found that the tempo of the putting stroke very much is in connection to the attitude of the player itself.
Yeah.
You can even see that there is a correlation. There are studies on that between your tempo of walking and your personality. So tempo seems to be not absolutely determined by a biomechanical problem in putting. It seems to be more your attitude, if you are more careful or more aggressive, I would say. So tempo is for us important to match it to a player's attitude rather than saying this is the optimum tempo. Certainly on longer putts, a slower tempo has advantages because you get more feedback of the swing. On shorter putts, a higher tempo might be an advantage because there's not much time to do something wrong. But apart from that, the tempo of your putting very much is related to your person.
That's interesting, and I'm sure you've seen way more tempos and strokes than I have, but you see some very careful strokes. But I'm guessing if almost you talk to somebody up front and ask the right questions about their personality, you might almost be able to predict that then a little bit in terms of what you'd see on the movement dynamics, right? As you said.
That's true. On the PGA Tour, certainly in amateurs, very many players use the wrong tempo because they don't know what the tempo is. So sometimes they are way too slow because they are too careful.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are even hitting it too fast because they hit at the ball to give it a distance. The two other aspects I need to mention are rhythm and timing. So rhythm is the ratio of the backstroke as compared to the forward stroke, or even more specifically, the ratio of the backstroke as compared back to impact, time back to impact. So there's a typical rhythm, which is in putting 2-1. So you need typically twice as much time from the start position to top of backswing as compared to the time from top of backswing back to impact. And very interestingly, this rhythm is the same for different tempos. So the slow players use the same rhythm as the fast players. So this ratio is kind of the relation of how much you invest into the backstroke as compared to how much you invest for the forward stroke. And because our muscles are having a kind of agonist-antagonist, bell-shaped, very smooth characteristic, if you accelerate with the same amount inside of the backstroke and back to impact, you then typically end up in this rhythm, which is what you can also see if you use constant force rate, so constant acceleration inside of your stroke, which is the ratio which you would end up. So this is kind of an invariant. You find it in most players that they have exactly this rhythm. And then the last aspect is timing. Timing is at what point in time do you hit impact inside of your forward swing? Mm-hmm. And certainly there are some theories about that, but there's a specific point in time where you hit impact, and this is also true for path. So the specific point inside of the path where you hit impact, and this is normally a third of the length of the forward stroke. So so these are the important characteristics we see in movement dynamics, and certainly this is of a lot of interest if it comes to training, because movement dynamics are very much linked to overall consistency and functional-wise to distance control. So by fixing movement dynamics, you would improve a lot with your putting stats.
Yeah. Now, this next question is really almost the impetus for why I was hoping I would get to talk with you on my podcast. See a whole wide range of articles out in the literature and talking about putting strokes. Good ones I've seen in Golf Digest. The backstroke is the same length as the forward stroke, and I've even seen some that say, well, the backstroke is a little bit longer than the forward stroke. And I know everything about the analysis and things that you've done with the Sam Putt Lab suggests that the best strokes from the standpoint of dynamics, connected with the dynamics, are what you might call 2 back and 3 forward, okay? A bit longer in the forward stroke than the backstroke. Can you talk a little bit about, the connection between sort of stroke length and movement dynamics and why being able to have a bit longer forward stroke is the optimum for golfers who want to putt their best?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the idea that you need to hit the ball in the center of your stroke is related to the idea that at center of the stroke you have maximum speed, and then you hit it with your maximum speed. I think this is the idea behind this 50-50 concept. So we are more empirical. So if we just measure without having a theory behind, just looking at the data, we find that pathwise, the average tour player hits the ball on a 4 meters putt, which is about kind of 13 feet or what.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
It's 36% of path with a standard deviation of 5%. So the range, including standard deviation, is from 31 to 41. So it's way off 50-50. And for timing, if you look at time, at what point in time you hit impact, then it's 39% with a standard deviation of 4. So it's 35 to 43%, which is also way off 50%. So there are some players who are very close to 50, but if we talk about the majority of PGA Tour players, they tend to have a shorter backstroke. Now the question is why? This is only empirical. And as I said, this is related to a 4 meters putt. We don't talk about the 1.5 meter pop-in putt, which might be different. We talk about a putt where you need distance control, and to have proper distance control, we think that you should at least at a lower level accelerate through the ball. So you should not decelerate through the ball. Now, if you look at physics, what is acceleration? Acceleration is the change of speed. So if you increase your speed, you accelerate. If you do no longer increase your speed at maximum speed, your acceleration is 0. And after maximum speed, you decrease your velocity, so you decelerate. So everything in front of max velocity is acceleration. And because we want to accelerate through the ball, we need to hit the ball earlier than 50%, because at 50% there would be maximum speed. So to us, it seems that the need to accelerate through the ball to get a better feel of impact results then in a backstroke which is a little bit shorter. So you hit it before maximum speed, you accelerate through the ball, and after impact, 50 milliseconds later, you then start to decelerate. But through impact itself, you clearly can see an acceleration phase, still acceleration. It is maybe reduced acceleration, but it's still acceleration. Yeah,
that's people who don't understand sort of the laws of physics that I learned in undergraduate school, what the relationship is between acceleration and velocity. Kind of get confused by that. But all the good SAM results that I've seen, show that the velocity is in fact going down a little bit, right? Immediately after that impact point. Is that right?
The impact certainly is lowering the speed of the putter because you lose about 12 to 15% of energy at impact. But directly after impact, the putter is still slightly increasing the velocity at a lower level, but still increasing velocity a little bit. So this means there is still some amount of acceleration after impact, which is very close to impact. But this just tells us that acceleration phase, there's an acceleration phase through impact and no deceleration phase.
Yeah. Now, so, we've talked about the details here, right? And it's a little hard just talking about it without pictures, but now you've got somebody where they've got some issues with their movement dynamics. And can you talk about some of the things that you do when you see somebody that has some issues with movement dynamics? Maybe talk about some specific, types of issues and what kind of tasks you give them to accomplish to help them improve their dynamics.
Yeah, so the movement dynamics are more related to distance control and to the dynamic aspects of face rotation, which is how the face angle changes during your stroke. So this would be the goal, to get these two aspects as smooth as possible and as consistent as possible. We would have different drills for the different aspects. Maybe I start with timing, which is the easy one. So if you want to have the forward stroke a little bit longer than the backstroke, you just put some tees into the ground, and then inside of your practice putt, you check where the length is in the backstroke and the forward stroke. Then you hit the putt and you check then the end position. Many beginners even have a follow-through which is way too long, so they don't stop, they continue on and on. So it's also important not to have it too long. So if it's at a range of, let's say, 40 to 60%, this is still quite okay. It doesn't need to be exactly 36 or 39. So if you just think about 40% and 60%, this is perfect. Now for rhythm, which is the ratio of backstroke to impact, we recommend to count. So this would be counting 2 for backstroke and 1 for the time back to impact. So if you, for example, would count 1001, then 1000 would be related to the length of the backstroke, and 1 would then be the time back to impact. Or you could count 1, 2 for backstroke and 3 for back to impact. And then we want you to count this loud while you hit first the practice putt and then hit the true putt. So it would be a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 on a very constant, smooth level. You could certainly then also change a little bit the tempo by counting 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3 to change a little bit of the tempo, but you should count on a very consistent level.
Sort of a ratio, right? Yeah.
So this would really guide you through your stroke and would really calm down the stroke to a very, very good rhythm, which would increase consistency straight away. Now for distance control, we have different drills which are very much related to this, to movement dynamics. One would be a field drill where you close your eyes at impact. So this is very fascinating. So you have your eyes open, you hit the putt, and exactly at the moment where you hit the ball, you close your eyes and you just let the putter go through the ball, and then you don't open your eyes again. And then you need to predict where the ball will end up, lengthwise and direction-wise. And then you open your eyes and you compare the true result to what you felt. So this is a very, very good drill to make you understand that distance control is something which is coming from the inside, which is not coming through conscious muscle control. It's more intuition and feel. And by closing your eyes, you really open this channel. If something is wrong, so certainly you need to adjust either the tempo or the length of the backstroke or whatever it is. If you have gone through this drill, we recommend to use a distance control sequence drill where you put tees at 2 to 10 meter, and then you use exactly the same rhythm, exactly the same smooth feel to putt to these random targets. You can again close your eyes. So really putt to the tees that the ball really stops at the tee, and then check how you can control the distance
between variable distances, right?
Variable distances, yeah, absolutely. Variable distances to make it a little bit more competitive. And then feel how you can control the length of the putt with your rhythm rather than using force of your muscles or hitting at the ball. So these are kind of small drills which help you to really get access to this intuitive competences which we have to improve our movement dynamics.
I hope people listening to this don't miss this little couple minutes of this, because, those 3 drills that you talk about, I think are very, very powerful for improving putting dynamics. It's almost like a hidden golf putting lesson in the whole thing, right? They're very, very valuable. I know you've worked with a zillion people, but I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about some of the most amazing success stories you've had, and I guess maybe focus toward, I guess you could talk overall putting, but helping some of the golfers you work with improve their movement dynamics. Some of the things that where something almost was a light bulb, or they really got it and they made big changes.
Yeah, so maybe I certainly there are a lot of stories around Sam Putlab, but maybe I'll give you two interesting stories which show that it is not only database to make you play differently by telling you what is right and wrong. We sometimes have a different approach measuring you if you are putting on a high level. So this one story happened with Niklas Fast playing on the PGA Europe Tour. And I think it's quite a time ago. I think it was in 2005, something like that. We have working with him intensively the year before, and he was putting quite well this time. And then we met him again in early next year in spring, and he came and said, well, guys, I have a problem with my putting. I don't know exactly what it is because I practiced hard during winter. I spent a lot of time practicing putting. And by the way, if your practice is too conscious, you really can lose your feel of your own putting stroke by manipulating too much, by practicing maybe some technical aspects which do not really match to what you should do. So we are very cautious that if we work with players, that we find a solution which really matches to the player's profile. Now, basically, he said, I lost my stroke and I'm a little bit helpless because the more I think about it, the worse it becomes. So we did something which is pretty simple. We reviewed the old data from the year before, and we just gave him feedback on his movement dynamics, actually, which was rhythm, tempo, and timing. So we just said, okay, too fast, too slow, and so on and so on. And so we went through this, and it took us maybe half an hour, and he said, oh, yeah, that's it. I got it. I can feel it again. This is exactly how it felt. I'm perfect. And he was very enthusiastic. Well, actually, the week after, he played first, I think, in New Zealand and then in Malaysia. And he won the first one, and he ranked second in the other tournament. And so basically, you can really boost players by giving them feedback, which is also encouraging themselves, not only by saying what is right and wrong, really by helping them to really be more mentally also be more powerful. So very often we see that if we use SimPutlab during practice, it also has a huge mental effect.
Yeah.
Because if you know that everything is right from a standpoint of the data, then you certainly are much more positive on the course.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe I give you another example, which is into this direction, which is it is one of the female junior players in Germany who struggled a lot with face angle and path since she was 14, and we tried to change it because it was a little bit scary, and she was lifting the putter up through impact a little bit like Patrick Harrington. So we had the feeling, we are not sure if she should continue doing it, but it was basically her style, and she loved it.
Yeah.
And she was not playing bad, but she had a problem with putting. This was obvious, but she wanted to keep the style. So we were very careful in giving her kind of a training environment with a mirror, with some feedback where she was always working on it. And then we saw the technique shifting more and more to neutral without really cutting into it. It was more shifting it step by step. And there was a certain point in time where we said, okay, in front of a very important tournament, we have been directly before the Spanish Amateurs Championships in South Spain. And she was now, I think, 16. And so we said, okay, now I think we are done. We have gone through it, and forget everything we have talked about before. Just focus on the putt and forget all the conscious aspects of our training. So we had another training session which was only linked to performance. And a week later, she won the Spanish Amateurs Championship. And since then, she decided to quit the amateurs team, and she's now playing on the European Ladies Tour. And so this was also a boost, and nobody at this point thought about really her exploding with her performance in that way. So very often, actually, what we see is that working right with the data really has much more influence on the game of a player as just changing one parameter or one data value. So
just having the knowledge of things and sort of integrating that into what you're doing I think is what you're saying, right?
Yes.
The knowledge of the information. I've seen a couple people that I knew were great putters, and I think it's the same thing that you said, that when they see that they really are, they're confused about it, but then they know they are for sure because it confirms it, and then they get even better.
Yeah. Well, in the end, putting is a skill which is extremely unconscious if you are playing on a high level. And maybe it's true for the whole game of golf, that basically you need to trust into your body. Certainly, you also need to trust into your mental abilities, but in the end, you need to trust into your body. If you look at Tiger, what's happening now, and if he is saying, well, I think my body wants to do one thing, and my brain wants to do something else. So if you are inside of this conflict, then you have a serious problem. So in putting, we often think that if we are doing it on a conscious level, by thinking about the task and thinking about what we need to do, we are doing it in the right way. But also in putting, it is basically a very intuitive and subconscious task if you are at a high level. And so although PuttLab provides data and you need to think about what to change, in the end, you always need to come back to what you are and to make the best out of yourself. And this is how we want to then use our knowledge about movement behavior and the data to really help each single individual player to perform best for what he is.
Wow, that's great advice. I think the fact that you understand a lot of the concept of motor learning and what really matters is maybe sort of 50% of what makes the SimPutlab things important and good for people. finally, any other final things you want to say to golfers about things they can do to help them improve their putting? And I'm sure some of it is, kind of trusting who you really are a little bit. But I'll give you the sort of the last word here, Christian.
Well, maybe my last word is something which I learned is very hard to understand, but which really helps us not only in putting, which helps us in our whole life. And this is to better understand what learning is. Learning is about transfer. So if you practice putting, then think about what you can take home from your practice lesson, what you can take home to use it out on the course. Very often we think if we are successful on a putting green by doing certain drills where we repeat specific tasks, very often we think that this has helped us. Now science tells us it's the other way around. So we need to practice with more variability to increase transfer. So although you might think that practicing difficult tasks, for example, putting from different lengths, slopes, uphill, downhill, breaks, short, long. So just mixing it up, makes it more like playing golf, and it is also increasing variability, and this is increasing transfer. So although you might think sometimes it's confusing because you don't really are able to understand what's going on during such type of practice, the next day out on the course, you will wonder how good you will be on the putting green. So increase variability to increase transfer. So this is something which we can use for any task where we need to learn. And this is an advice to any golfer who wants to increase his performance on the course.
Christian, thanks for that end point. So for golfers who want to learn more about Science in Motion sports, the Science in Motion Putt Lab, and other things, there's the Science in Motion Academy and some good articles there on the site. Go to www.scienceinmotion.com. And Christian, I'm going to go back and listen to this again now that we've completed it almost immediately, because I know there's some things for me that are going to help me do what I get to do with golfers. So thank you for taking the time to do this today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
www.gameimprovementgolf.com.
Thanks again for that great interview, Christian. One of the things that I quickly learned and got excited about when I got the Science in Motion Putt Lab, there is much more to helping people improve their putting than simply looking at the numbers from Sam. And it's been a real pleasure for me to get to take some training from Christian, because he really integrates his knowledge of motor learning with looking at that information and providing a lot of feedback to people who have who have individual SAM Putt Labs on how to use that equipment appropriately and most effectively to help people improve their putting. So if you want to learn more about Science in Motion sports and the SAM Putt Lab, go to www.scienceinmotion.com. And I've also put a link in the show notes to a write-up that's on that site called The Fundamentals of Putting, which has a number of short articles related to those 6 fundamentals of putting that we mentioned some in this interview. Well, that's it for today. In 2 weeks, we'll talk with Howard Garson, who is just opening a new custom club fitting shop in Hallandale Beach, Florida. Birdies and Aces. Thought it'd be fun to talk with somebody who's, well, he's not new to club fitting, but who is just opening a place like this, and talk about what he's going through in terms of doing that. So, see you again in 2 weeks.
Game Improvement Golf, your source of information and inspiration to become an exceptional golfer now. www.gameimprovementgolf.com